"We misjudged you, Selah," Catherine Mercer whispers to her, voice breaking under Chicago's Hyde Park garden glow. Lilacs and fairy lights cradle Selah Monroe's wedding, her white gown shimmering as 2-year-old Arya toddles beside her, clutching a tiny bouquet. Julian waits under an ivy-draped arch, his eyes ablaze with love forged through defiance. Lake Michigan's breeze carries friends' laughter, softening the sting of past prejudice. The Mercers' presence whispers of redemption, but is their pride genuine? How did Selah and Julian rise from rejection to this radiant moment? Subscribe and hit the bell for our latest tales of resilience. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? Chicago, Hanoi, or beyond? What time is it there? Stay tuned. This story of defiant hearts will hold you to the end. The Chicago skyline glittered like a jagged crown of stars, its lights slicing through the dusk as Selah Monroe stepped into the sleek conference room atop the Willis Tower. At 28, her deep brown skin glowed under the fluorescent hum. Her tightly coiled hair swept into an elegant updo that framed a face both sharp and warm. Her tailored blazer hugged her slender frame, a quiet armor against the corporate world's scrutiny. As a rising interior designer, Selah had clawed her way from Bronzeville's cracked sidewalks to this glass-walled arena, where her vision for a Hyde Park community park hung in the balance. The room buzzed with tension, executives in crisp suits, their eyes flicking between laptops and her. She adjusted the silver locket at her neck, a keepsake from her late mother, its weight grounding her. This was her moment. Across the mahogany table sat Julian Mercer, 32, the youngest director at Mercer Holdings. His sandy hair caught the city's glow, his green eyes sharp with the confidence of a man born into wealth. His navy suit was impeccable, but his posture, leaned back, one hand tapping a pen, hinted at boredom. Mercer Holdings, his family's real estate empire, held the purse strings for the park project. Selah's proposal, a vibrant space with murals and playgrounds for Hyde Park's diverse families, was her heart poured onto blueprints. Julian's team, however, saw dollar signs in sleek benches and minimalist fountains. The clash was inevitable. "Ladies and gentlemen," Selah began, her voice clear, resonant, cutting through the room's murmur. She clicked her remote, and the screen lit up with her design, a park alive with color, winding paths, and spaces for kids to laugh and elders to rest. This isn't just a park. It's a home for a community that's been overlooked. Hyde Park's kids deserve a place where their stories matter, not just another sterile plaza. Her eyes, fierce yet inviting, scanned the room, daring them to dismiss her. Julian leaned forward, his pen stilling. "Ms. Monroe, it's bold, I'll give you that. But bold doesn't pay. Your design screams passion, not profit. Our investors want elegance, not a playground that looks like a street fair." His tone was cool, but his gaze lingered on her, a flicker of curiosity beneath the critique. Selah's jaw tightened, but her smile didn't falter. "Profit comes from people, Mr. Mercer. Families will come to a park that feels like theirs, not a museum they're afraid to touch. I grew up in Bronzeville, where a park was my refuge. I know what this can mean." Her words carried the weight of her past, each syllable a defiance of the room's polished skepticism. The executives shifted, some nodding, others glancing at Julian. He tilted his head, a half-smile playing on his lips. "Refuge is poetic, but we're building for investors. Not nostalgia. Streamline it, less color, more class." His challenge was sharp, but his eyes held something softer, as if testing her resolve. The room crackled with their sparring. Selah stepped closer to the screen, pointing to a mural in her design. "This color is a story, a tribute to Chicago's South Side artists. Strip it away and you're erasing the people you claim to serve." Her voice rose, not in anger, but in conviction, her locket glinting as she moved. The executives leaned in, caught by her fire. Julian stood, his height commanding the space. "You're asking us to bet millions on sentiment. Show me numbers, foot traffic, revenue projections." His words were a blade, but his tone carried an undercurrent of intrigue. as if her defiance intrigued him more than he'd admit. Selah met his gaze, unflinching. I have numbers. My research shows community-driven spaces increase local business by 20%. But if you only see dollars, you're missing the point. This park is a legacy, not a paycheck. The room stilled, her words a spark in the sterile air. Even Julian paused, his half-smile fading into something unreadable. The meeting dragged on, but the battle lines were drawn. As the executives filed out, Selah stayed to pack her notes, her heart pounding. Julian lingered, his shadow falling across her blueprints. You don't back down, do you? He said, his voice low, almost amused. She looked up, her eyes piercing. Not when it matters. You'd know that if you ever stepped out of Lake Forest. Her jab was bold, a risk, but her locket felt warm against her skin, urging her on. Julian chuckled, a sound that softened the room's edges. Fair point. Look, we're stuck finalizing these plans tonight. Care to join me? We can argue over coffee, or something stronger. His offer was casual, but his eyes held a challenge, a spark that matched hers. Selah hesitated. She knew his type, wealthy, charming, untouchable. Yet there was something in his gaze, a curiosity that mirrored her own. Only if it's jazz. And whiskey, she said, her smile a dare. Hyde Park's got a better pulse than this tower. An hour later, they sat in a dimly lit bar on 53rd Street, the air thick with saxophone notes and the clink of glasses. The neon glow of Hyde Park's streets spilled through the windows, painting Selah's face in shades of blue and gold. She sipped her whiskey, her guard still up, but Julian's questions surprised her. He asked about Bronzeville, about the park that saved her as a kid, about the stories behind her designs. For the first time, she saw past his suit to a man who listened, not just to respond, but to understand. You're not what I expected, Julian admitted, swirling his drink. Most designers pitch trends. You pitch soul. His voice was quiet, but his eyes were steady, searching hers. Selah leaned back, her locket catching the bar's light. And you're not what I expected either. I thought you'd be all profit, no heart. She paused, her smile teasing. Jury's still out on that one. He laughed, a sound that warmed the space between them. The night stretched on, their banter flowing as easily as the jazz. Selah felt a pull, dangerous and thrilling, like stepping onto a tightrope. Julian, too, sensed it, a connection that defied the divide between their worlds. But in the back of his mind, a shadow loomed. His mother, Catherine Mercer, with her ironclad expectations and unspoken prejudices. He didn't mention her, not yet. This moment, under Hyde Park's neon pulse, was theirs alone. As they parted, ways the Chicago wind howled, carrying the scent of the lake. Selah clutched her locket, her mother's voice echoing, "You're enough, always." Julian's card burned in her pocket, his number scrawled in bold ink. She didn't know it yet, but this was the first spark of a fire that would test them both. The city's skyline flickered, a canvas of possibility and peril, and their story had just begun. The Lake Forest mansion loomed like a marble fortress under the November dusk, its white columns stark against the bare oaks lining the drive. Selah Monroe, in a deep emerald gown that hugged her slender frame, gripped Julian Mercer's hand as they approached. At 28, her coiled hair cascaded in soft waves, catching the glow of the porch lanterns. Her silver locket, her mother's keepsake, pulsed against her chest, a quiet anchor against the storm she sensed awaiting. Tonight was Catherine Mercer's 60th birthday, a gilded affair where Selah, a black woman from Bronzeville, would step into the Mercer family's world. Julian, 32, in a charcoal suit, squeezed her hand, his green eyes fierce with resolve. "You're enough," he whispered, echoing her mother's words from their Hyde Park nights. But Selah's heart thudded, her boots clicking on the gravel like a countdown to judgment. Inside, the foyer was a cathedral of wealth, crystal chandeliers casting prisms, marble floors gleaming under soft jazz. Catherine Mercer greeted them, her silver blonde hair swept into a chignon, her cream silk dress screaming old money. Her smile was polished but thin, her blue eyes appraising Selah like a diamond under scrutiny. "Julian, darling," she said, embracing him, then turning to Selah. "You must be Selah, welcome." Her voice was smooth, but the pause before Selah's name cut like a blade. Elise, Julian's older sister, stood nearby, her auburn hair pinned tightly, her gaze sharp. In a navy sheath dress, she offered a nod, her lips twitching into a smile. That didn't reach her eyes. The air was heavy, the jazz a cruel contrast to the tension coiling beneath. The dining room was a spectacle. Mahogany table laden with roasted pheasant, silver candelabras flickering, crystal wine glasses glinting. Selah sat beside Julian, her posture impeccable, her emerald gown a quiet defiance against the room's sterile opulence. Guests, Lake Forest elite in tailored suits and pearls, murmured, their glances darting to her. She was used to it, the way her presence stirred unease in rooms like this. Her locket burned against her skin, grounding her as Catherine raised a glass. "To family," she toasted, her eyes flicking to Selah, the word family a subtle exclusion. Dinner began, and Catherine's questions came, cloaked in politeness. "Selah, your work in design, it's so community-focused," she said, the word community heavy with condescension. "Isn't it exhausting dealing with such challenging areas?" Her smile was a mask, implying Selah's world was lesser. Selah met her gaze, her voice clear. "It's rewarding. Every space I design gives kids like I was a chance to dream. That's worth more than exhaustion." Her words were a shield, but Catherine's lips twitched, unconvinced. Elise leaned forward, her tone deceptively light. "I heard your last project, a community center, was rejected by our firm. Something about mismatched aesthetics?" The jab was sharp, hinting at a past Selah had buried. A Bronzeville project Mercer Holdings deemed too urban. Julian's hand tightened on hers under the table. "Elise, that was a board decision, not Selah's fault. Her designs are brilliant." His voice was firm, but his eyes pleaded for calm. Selah's chest tightened, her locket a burning weight. "The center was built," she said, her voice steady despite the fire within, "funded by locals who saw its value. Sometimes vision outlives rejection." Her eyes locked on Elise's, a challenge thrown into the silence. The guests shifted, some impressed, others uneasy. Catherine's smile sharpened. "Of course, dear, but our family values tradition. Julian's future requires alignment." The words landed like stones, each one a rejection of Selah's roots, her blackness. Julian's jaw clenched, his voice low. "Selah's vision aligns with mine. She's changing lives, Mother." Catherine's eyes narrowed, but she sipped her wine, deflecting. "Let's not bore our guests with business." The table murmured agreement, but the air grew heavier, each bite punctuated by veiled barbs. Elise probed further, her voice syrupy. "Selah, you grew up in Bronzeville, yes? It must be humbling, coming from so little to a place like this." The question sliced at Selah's core, painting her as an outsider. "I'm proud of where I'm from," Selah replied, her voice resonant, slicing through the chatter. "Bronzeville taught me resilience. It's why I design spaces that matter." Her locket glinted as she spoke, her mother's strength coursing through her. A few guests nodded, caught by her fire, but Catherine's smile grew colder. "Resilience is admirable," she said, "but legacy is delicate. Julian's role in our family demands care." The implication was clear. Selah didn't belong. The night dragged, each course a test of Selah's composure. Julian's hand never left hers, his touch a vow against the chill. As dessert was served, lavender creme brulee, its sweetness cloying, Catherine raised another toast. "To Julian, our pride," she said, her eyes avoiding Selah. The guests clapped, but Selah felt the weight of their verdict. She was a guest in their world, not family. As they left, the oak doors closing behind them, Catherine's parting. Words were ice. Think carefully, Julian. Love is fleeting. Legacy endures. In the car, Sela stared at the Lake Forest oaks blurring past, her locket heavy. "They'll never see me," she said, her voice low, raw. Julian's hands whitened on the wheel. "They will. I'll make them." His voice broke, but his resolve was steel. Zala touched her locket, her mother's voice echoing, "You're enough." The Chicago skyline flickered in the distance, a promise of hope and hardship. Tonight was a wound, but Sala's strength was her armor, and she'd fight for Julian, no matter the cost. The Hyde Park apartment hummed with the quiet pulse of dawn, sunlight slipping through sheer curtains to dance across worn hardwood floors. Sela Monroe, now 28 and 6 months pregnant, stood at the kitchen counter, her deep brown skin glowing in the morning light. Her coiled hair was tied loosely, strands framing a face taut with resolve. The silver locket at her neck, her mother's keepsake, felt heavier today, a reminder of battles past and those looming. 3 months had passed since Catherine Mercer's 60th birthday, where her icy words, "Love is fleeting, legacy endures," had sliced through Sela's heart. Julian Mercer, her anchor, had vowed to make his family see her. But now, as Chicago's skyline twinkled beyond their window, a new truth weighed on Sela. She was carrying their child. Her hand rested on her belly, a silent vow to the life within. The city's pulse synced with hers, but a shadow lingered. Julian shuffled in, his sandy hair tousled, his green eyes soft with sleep. At 32, his navy sweater clung to his broad frame, a quiet contrast to the corporate suits of his family's world. He wrapped his arms around Sela, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Morning, love," he murmured, his voice warm. But Sela's gaze was fixed on the river beyond, Lake Michigan's waves a restless mirror of her thoughts. Last night, over takeout pizza in their cramped living room, she'd told him about the pregnancy. His joy had been instant, his hands cupping her face, promising a future for their child. They decided to keep the baby, to build a life in this one-bedroom haven, its walls lined with Sela's sketches and Julian's dog-eared books. But Catherine's shadow loomed, her prejudice a wall they couldn't ignore. "We need to tell your father," Sela said, her voice low, steady despite the storm within. Julian's arms stiffened, his breath catching. "He's not like Mother," he said, but doubt threaded his words. "He'll listen." Sela turned to him, her eyes sharp. "Listening isn't accepting, Julian. We need to know where he stands." Her locket burned against her skin, urging her forward. Julian nodded, his jaw tight, and arranged a meeting at a quiet cafe on 53rd Street, far from the Mercer mansion's suffocating opulence. The cafe was a slice of Hyde Park's soul, brick, walls adorned with local art, the scent of espresso mingling with jazz from a corner speaker. Richard Mercer sat across from them, his gray suit creased, his broad shoulders slumped as if carrying an unseen weight. At 65, his face was a map of lines, his eyes a faded green that mirrored Julian's but lacked their fire. Sela, in a loose sweater that hid her growing belly, sat tall, her locket glinting. Julian's hand rested on hers, a silent pact. "Dad," he began, his voice steady. "Sela's pregnant. We're building a family." Richard's eyes flicked to Sela, then back to his coffee, his fingers tightening on the cup. "Congratulations," Richard said, his voice gruff, measured. "A child's a big step." He paused, his gaze distant. "But Julian, don't expect your mother to embrace this. She's set in her ways." The words landed like stones, heavy with resignation. Sela's chest tightened, her locket a burning anchor. "Mr. Mercer," she said, her voice clear, "this child deserves a family that sees us, both of us. Where do you stand?" Her question was a blade cutting through the cafe's hum. Richard met her gaze, his eyes heavy with something unspoken. "I want what's best for Julian," he said. "But Catherine, she fears losing our legacy. Don't push her to accept what she doesn't understand." His words were a warning, not a bridge. Julian's hand clenched hers under the table, his voice low. "She'll have to understand, Dad. This is our life." Richard's nod was curt, his silence louder than words. As he left, the cafe's jazz felt hollow, the notes unable to mask the rift. Selah touched her locket, her mother's voice echoing, "You're enough." But doubt gnawed at her, a shadow born of a life spent navigating rooms where her blackness was a question mark. Back at the apartment, the city's pulse thrummed, but a darker storm brewed. Julian received a call from his mother's assistant, a clipped summons to the Mercer Holdings office. There, Catherine waited, her silver blonde hair immaculate, her eyes cold as steel. "I've heard about the child," she said, her voice a velvet blade. "This situation complicates things, Julian. Your future is with us, not her." She slid a folder across the desk, reports from a private investigator, detailing Selah's childhood in Bronzeville's poorest corners, her mother's death, her scrapped-together education. "She's not one of us," Catherine said. "I've ensured the right people know." Julian's face darkened, his hands trembling as he pushed the folder back. "You had her followed?" His voice was a growl, raw with betrayal. "She's carrying my child, Mother. She's my family." Catherine's lips pressed into a thin line. "Family is legacy, Julian. She'll drag you down." The words were venom, and Julian stormed out, his heart a tangle of fury and guilt. He didn't tell Selah about the investigator. Not yet. But the rumors began, whispers in Chicago's design circles. Selah Monroe, the upstart from the wrong side of town, unfit for Mercer's heir. Weeks later, Selah felt the sting. A client canceled a contract citing reputation concerns, her inbox filled with veiled rejections, her name tainted by Catherine's hand. Alone in the apartment, her belly rounding, she stood by the window, the Chicago River shimmering below. The city's neon pulse felt like a heartbeat, but hers was fracturing. Julian came home, his eyes shadowed with guilt. "Mother's behind this," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I didn't know how far she'd go." Selah's locket burned against her skin, her voice steady despite the ache. "I've fought worse than rumors, Julian. But you need to choose, us or them." Her words were a vow, a challenge. Julian pulled her close, his arms a shield against the world. "You and our baby," he said, his voice fierce, "always." But as they stood, the river's flow a witness to their pact, Selah knew love alone couldn't dismantle Catherine's wall. She touched her locket, her mother's strength coursing through her. The city pulsed outside, its lights a canvas of hope and hardship. Their child would be born into a world that judged her mother's skin. But Selah was a warrior, and she'd fight for her baby, for Julian, for herself. The Chicago River shimmered under a late winter moon, its surface a fractured mirror of the city's neon pulse. Selah Monroe, 28, stood alone in her Hyde Park apartment, her deep brown skin catching the dim glow of a laptop screen. Her coiled hair hung loose, framing a face etched with exhaustion and fire. 7 months had passed since Catherine Mercer's venomous rumors began poisoning Selah's reputation, branding her an unfit outsider in Chicago's design circles. Her newborn daughter, Aria, slept in a crib nearby, her tiny chest rising with soft breaths. Selah's silver locket, her mother's keepsake, burned against her chest, a tether to her strength. The world had tried to dim her light, clients canceling, whispers trailing her like shadows. But tonight she fought back. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, pouring her pain into an anonymous blog the rooms were locked out of. Each word was a blade, carving her truth. The apartment was a sanctuary of defiance, its walls lined with sketches of community spaces Selah still dreamed of building. Aria's crib sat by the window, where the river's flow whispered of resilience. Selah wrote of doors slammed shut, not just by Catherine's rumors, but by a world that judged her blackness, her Bronzeville roots, her audacity to love Julian Mercer. "These rooms," she typed, "are boardrooms, dining halls, futures, spaces we're told we don't belong, but we're here and we'll keep knocking." Her words were raw, unyielding, a manifesto born of nights spent cradling Arya while doubt gnawed at her soul. She hit publish, her heart pounding, unaware that her voice would soon ignite a fire. Across town, in his Lake Forest condo, Julian Mercer sat sleepless, his green eyes fixed on his phone. At 32, his sandy hair was disheveled, his jaw tight with guilt. Catherine's sabotage, hiring an investigator to unearth Selah's past, had driven a wedge between them. He'd chosen Selah and Arya, but his silence during the rumors' spread haunted him. Scrolling through Chicago design forums, he stumbled on Selah's blog, its title a gut punch. Her words seared him, stories of rejection, of carrying a child, while her name was slandered, of fighting for a place in a world that saw her as less. He read late into the night, the city's skyline a distant blur, his heart a tangle of shame and awe. Selah was a warrior, and he'd let her fight alone. By morning, the blog rippled through Chicago's creative underbelly. A local journalist, Maya Torres, shared it on Twitter, her post, "This is the voice Chicago needs," sparking retweets from designers, activists, and community organizers. By noon, the rooms were locked out of Trended, its anonymous author a mystery that fueled its power. Selah, feeding Arya in their apartment, was oblivious to the storm she'd unleashed. Her phone buzzed with a text from a former colleague. "Is this you? It's everywhere." She froze, her locket warm against her skin. Exposure was a risk, but silence was a cage. She kept her anonymity, letting her words speak. Julian, meanwhile, drove to the Mercer mansion, the oaks lining the drive stark under a gray sky. Catherine sat in her study, her silver blonde hair immaculate, her eyes cold as she scanned a tablet. "Mother," Julian said, his voice a low growl, "you tried to ruin her." He tossed a printout of Selah's blog onto her desk, its words circled in red. "They dig up your past to bury your future." Catherine's face paled, her fingers tightening on her pearls. "I protected our legacy," she said, her voice sharp. "She's not our kind, Julian." He leaned forward, his green eyes blazing. "You taught me to build houses, Mother, but never to open doors for those who don't look like us. Selah's words are waking up this city, and you're the villain in them." His accusation hung heavy, a thunderclap in the room's silence. Catherine's lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, her composure cracked, her eyes darting to the blog's searing lines. Julian left, the mansion's weight suffocating, his resolve steel. He had to find Selah. Back in Hyde Park, Selah stood by the river, Arya in a sling against her chest. The blog's reach stunned her. Comments flooded in, from Southside artists to uptown activists, calling her words a beacon. But fear gnawed at her. Catherine's reach was long, and exposure could bring new wounds. Her locket burned, her mother's voice echoing, "You're enough." As dusk fell, Julian's car pulled up, his face shadowed with urgency. He stepped out, his navy coat catching the wind. "Selah," he said, his voice raw. "I read it. All of it. I faced her." Selah's eyes searched his, her heart a storm. "And?" she asked, her voice steady despite the ache. Julian stepped closer, his hands trembling. "I told her she's wrong. About you, about us, I should have fought harder sooner. I'm here now for you and Arya." His words were a vow, but Selah's gaze was guarded. She'd carried their daughter alone, her name battered by rumors. Trust was a bridge half built. She touched her locket, Arya's warmth grounding her. "Words aren't enough, Julian," she said, her voice a quiet blade. "Show me you're with us." He nodded, his eyes fierce with promise. The river flowed on, its surface catching the city's lights, a witness to their fragile pact. Selah's blog had cracked open a door, its words echoing in Chicago's heart. Comments poured in, one from a teen in Bronzeville. "You're telling my story." Another from a designer. "Keep fighting." Selah's anonymity held, but her voice was a flame, kindling hope in those locked out. The city pulsed beyond, its skyline a canvas of possibility and peril. Selah held Arya close, her locket gleaming, her resolve unyielding. Catherine's rumors had wounded her, but her words were fighting back, louder than ever. Julian stood beside her, his hand brushing hers, a silent pledge to rebuild what was broken. The blog's fire was spreading, and Selah knew this was only the beginning. She was no longer just a designer or a mother. She was a voice, and Chicago was listening. The Hyde Park air buzzed with anticipation, the late spring sun casting golden streaks across the 57th Street beach, where Chicago's skyline met Lake Michigan's restless waves. Selah Monroe stood at the edge of a wooden stage, her deep brown skin glowing under a flowing ochre dress, her coiled hair catching the breeze. At 29, her silver locket, her mother's keepsake, pulsed against her chest, a quiet anchor amid the crowd's hum. 9 months had passed since her blog, the rooms were locked out of, set Chicago's creative scene ablaze, its anonymous words exposing the sting of prejudice. Tonight was the launch of the Bridge Project, a community park her designs had birthed, funded by grassroots donors after Mercer Holdings' rejection. Aria, her 9-month-old daughter, gurgled in a stroller nearby, her tiny hands clutching a toy. Selah's heart thudded, not from the crowd, but from Julian Mercer's absence. Had he faltered again? Julian, 33, had spent months unraveling his ties to Mercer Holdings, his family's real estate empire. Catherine's refusal to fund the Bridge Project, citing its lack of prestige, had been the final straw. He'd walked away, his green eyes blazing with resolve to start New Ground Studio, a fledgling firm focused on community-driven projects. But the cost was steep. Investors shunned him, old allies whispered of betrayal, and his bank account dwindled. Selah, wary after his silence during Catherine's rumors, had kept her distance, demanding action over words. Tonight, as the crowd gathered, local artists, families, reporters, her eyes scanned for him, her locket warm against her skin. The lake's waves crashed, a rhythm of hope and doubt. The stage was simple, draped in ivy, a nod to Selah's vision of a park that belonged to all. She stepped to the microphone, her voice clear, resonant. "This park isn't just land," she said, her words slicing through the evening air. "It's a bridge between communities, between dreams. We built it because no one can lock us out of our own future." The crowd erupted, their cheers a tide lifting her. Maya Torres, the journalist who'd amplified Selah's blog, stood in the front, her camera flashing. Selah's gaze softened as she glanced at Aria, whose babbling echoed her mother's fire. But Julian's absence was a wound, raw and unspoken. Then, a ripple in the crowd. Julian emerged, his navy blazer rumpled, his sandy hair catching the sunset's glow, his green eyes locked on Selah, a storm of guilt and determination in them. He climbed the stage, uninvited, his presence a spark in the fading light. The crowd hushed, sensing a shift. Selah's breath caught, her locket burning. "Julian," she said, her voice low, guarded. He took the microphone, his hands trembling but his gaze steady. "Chicago," he began, his voice raw. "I'm Julian Mercer, and I've been part of the problem." The crowd stilled, the lake's waves the only sound. Julian turned to Selah, his eyes glistening. "I grew up in a world that built walls, not bridges. My family, my mother tried to tear down the woman I love, the mother of my child." He gestured to Aria, who cooed, oblivious. "Selah, your words woke this city, and they woke me. I left Mercer Holdings because I believe in you, in us. I was wrong to stay silent when you needed me most." His voice broke and he dropped to one knee, not in proposal, but in penance. "I'm here, for you and Aria, to build a future where no one's locked out. Forgive me." Selah's heart raced, her eyes searching his. The crowd held its breath, Maya's camera clicking softly. Aria's giggle pierced the silence, a beacon of innocence. Selah's locket felt like fire, her mother's voice echoing, "You're enough." She'd carried Aria alone, fought rumors alone. But Julian's words, raw, public, cracked her guard. She stepped forward, her ochre dress catching the light, and took his hand. "Words aren't enough, Julian," she said, her voice steady but soft. "But this is a start." She pulled him to his feet, their fingers interlocking, a fragile bridge between them. The crowd erupted, their cheers a wave, crashing over the stage. Reporters surged forward, their questions a flurry. "Mr. Mercer, what's next for New Ground Studio?" one asked. Julian, still holding Sayla's hand, smiled faintly. "We're building spaces that belong to everyone, starting here." Maya Torres scribbled furiously, her article already taking shape. Sayla glanced at Arya, then at Julian, her eyes fierce with hope and caution. She'd seen his fire before, but trust was a slow rebuild. The lake's breeze carried the scent of possibility, but also the weight of battles fought. As the event wound down, families explored the park's winding paths, kids laughing on swings Sayla had designed. Julian knelt by Arya's stroller, his fingers brushing her tiny curls. "I'll prove it, Sayla," he whispered, his voice thick. "Every day." Sayla nodded, her locket gleaming under the stars. The crowd's energy lingered, their cheers echoing in her heart. The bridge. Project was more than a park. It was a testament to her fight, her voice. But Catherine's shadow loomed, her rumors a wound that hadn't fully healed. Sayla knew Julian's stand was a beginning, not an end. The Chicago skyline twinkled, its lights a canvas of hope and hardship. Sayla stood by the lake, Arya in, her arms, Julian at her side. The city pulsed, its waves a rhythm of defiance. Her blog had given her a voice, but tonight, Julian had amplified it. She touched her locket, her resolve steel. They'd built a bridge, but the road ahead was fragile. For Arya, for herself, Sayla would keep fighting, and Julian would have to prove he was truly by her side. The Hyde Park Community Center stood like a phoenix on 55th Street, its weathered brick walls reborn with vibrant murals under Chicago's autumn sky. Sayla Monroe, 29, stood inside, her deep brown skin catching the sunlight streaming through tall windows. Her coiled hair was pulled into a loose bun, strands framing a face alight with purpose. Her silver locket, her mother's keepsake, pulsed against her chest, a beacon of resilience. A year had passed since Julian Mercer's public apology at the bridge project launch, his vow to stand by her and their daughter, Arya, now 18 months old, who toddled nearby, clutching a crayon. The center, once a crumbling house, was now a haven for Hyde Park's diverse families, art classes, community meals, laughter echoing through its halls. But Catherine Mercer's shadow lingered, her prejudice a wound that hadn't fully healed. Zalee's heart beat steady, but the fight wasn't over. The center buzzed with life, kids painting murals, elders sharing stories, the scent of fresh coffee mingling with paint. Sayla led an art class, her ochre sweater dusted with chalk as she guided a teen's brush. Arya babbled in a corner, her tiny curls bouncing. Julian, 33, worked beside her, his sandy hair flecked with paint, his green eyes bright with quiet pride. New Ground Studio, his fledgling firm, had poured every dime into this center, a defiant middle finger to his family's empire. But the cost was heavy. Late nights, dwindling savings, and whispers from Lake Forest elites calling him a traitor. Sayla, still cautious after his earlier silence, watched him closely. His actions spoke louder now, but trust was a slow rebuild, like the walls they'd restored. Outside, the Chicago River glimmered, its flow a steady pulse against the city's hum. Sayla's blog, "The Rooms We're Locked Out Of," still resonated, its anonymous words now a rallying cry for Chicago's marginalized. Maya Torres, the journalist who'd amplified it, had written a feature, dubbing the center Hyde Park's Heart. The article drew crowds, but also Catherine Mercer's attention. She'd begun attending events, her silver blonde hair stark against the center's warmth, her pearls glinting like armor. Sayla met her with grace, but her locket burned, a reminder of Catherine's rumors that had once scarred her name. Today, Catherine arrived unannounced, her cream coat immaculate, her eyes scanning the murals with a mix of curiosity and unease. She lingered by a painting of Bronzeville's streets, its colors bold, unapologetic. "Selah," she said, her voice tight. "This place is unexpected." The word was a jab, but softer than her usual barbs. Selah nodded, her voice steady. "It's a home for those who've been locked out, like I was." Catherine's lips parted, but she said nothing, her gaze flickering to Aria, who giggled, chasing a paper butterfly. Elise, Julian's sister, arrived with her 4-year-old daughter Lila, whose auburn curls matched her mother's. Elise, once sharp with suspicion, had softened since the bridge project, her daughter's laughter thawing her reserve. Lila ran to Aria, offering a crayon. "Draw with me," she chirped. Selah watched, her heart a tangle of hope and caution. Elise approached, her navy dress less rigid than her Lake Forest armor. "Lila loves it here," she said, her voice hesitant. "You've built something real." Selah's locket warmed, but she only nodded, her eyes sharp. Words were cheap. She'd learned that lesson. The turning point came during a community event, a fundraiser for art supplies, the center packed with families, artists, and reporters. Selah spoke, her voice resonant, slicing through the chatter. "This center isn't just walls, it's a promise. No one's locked out here." The crowd cheered, Maya Torres scribbling notes. Catherine stood in the back, her face unreadable, but her eyes lingered on Selah, then Aria. As the event ended, Lila tugged Catherine's hand, her voice clear. "Nana, why don't you call Aria's mama family?" The question pierced the air, a child's truth cutting through adult walls. Catherine froze, her pearls trembling, her composure fraying. She stammered, her eyes meeting Selah's. Axela's breath caught, her locket burning. She knelt beside Lila, her voice soft but firm. "She's my family, Lila. Always will be." The crowd hushed, sensing the weight. Catherine's face paled, her hand tightening on Lila's. "I'm learning, child," she whispered, but her eyes glistened, a crack in her fortress. She turned away, her steps unsteady. Julian, wiping paint from his hands, joined Selah, his green eyes heavy with pride. "You were incredible," he said, his voice low. Selah's gaze softened, but her heart held back. "We're not done." "Julian," she said, her hand brushing Aria's curls. He nodded, his jaw tight. "I know, I'll keep proving it." Richard Mercer, who'd been reading about Chicago's redlining history, approached, his gray suit out of place among the paint-splattered crowd. "Selah," he said, his voice gruff. "This place, it's vital. I was wrong to stay silent." His apology was clumsy, but his eyes held regret. Selah's locket pulsed, her voice steady. "It's a start, Richard." The crowd's warmth wrapped them, but Catherine's silence lingered, a reminder of battles ahead. As the event ended, families lingered, kids laughing in the muraled halls. Selah held Aria, her locket gleaming under the lights. The river outside flowed, a witness to their triumph. Catherine's faltering words, Elise's softening, Richard's remorse. They were sparks in the dark. The center stood as proof of Selah's fire, but the Mercer wall wasn't fully broken. Julian's hand brushed hers, a vow renewed. The Chicago skyline twinkled, a canvas of hope and hardship. Selah's heart was full, but her resolve was steel. For Aria, for herself, she'd keep building, one room at a time. The Hyde Park garden shimmered under a Chicago twilight, its wildflowers and fairy lights weaving a fragile halo against the deepening indigo sky. Selah Monroe, 30, stood at the threshold of a rose-strewn aisle, her deep brown skin luminous in a white gown that cascaded like a river under moonlight. Her coiled hair, threaded with jasmine, framed a face alight with defiance and love. Her silver locket, her mother's keepsake, burned warm against her chest, a pulse of strength earned through years of battle. Today she would marry Julian Mercer, her partner in a love that had defied prejudice. Aria, nearly 2, clutched her hand, her lilac dress swaying, her tiny curls bouncing as she giggled. Lake Michigan's waves whispered beyond, a rhythm sinking, with Selah's heart. The Chicago skyline glittered, a distant crown for a moment carved from sacrifice. This was her triumph, but the scars of the past lingered. The garden tucked in Hyde Park's embrace was alive with warmth. Rows of wooden chairs cradling friends, community center families, and artists. Their murmurs a stark contrast to the Mercer mansion's icy silence years ago. Julian stood beneath an arch draped in ivy and starlight, his navy suit sharp against his broad frame, his sandy hair catching the fading sun. At 34, his green eyes held Sela, a vow unspoken, his smile trembling with awe. 2 years had passed since the community center's opening, where Catherine Mercer's halting words had hinted at change. Sela and Julian had forged a life, raising Arya, building bridges. But Catherine's prejudice was a wound not fully healed. As Sela stepped forward, her locket pulsed, her gown trailing like a banner of resilience. Arya broke free, scattering petals with a squeal. "Mama's pretty," she chirped, her voice a bell ringing through the 60 guests' laughter. Sela knelt, kissing her daughter's forehead, her locket glinting. "You're my star, baby," she whispered. The jazz quartet struck a soft chord, and Sela walked alone, her steps steady, her head high. She'd once longed for a father's arm, but her strength was her guide. Julian's hand met hers, his touch electric, a promise sealed before words. The officiant, a community elder, spoke of love's courage, but Sela's world was Julian's gaze, Arya's clap, the lake's ceaseless song. In the front row, Catherine and Richard Mercer sat, their arrival unheralded, a shadow of reconciliation. Catherine's ivory silk dress was rigid, her silver blonde hair a crown of restraint, but her eyes betrayed a storm, regret warring with pride. Richard, in a gray suit, offered a faint nod, his gaze softer, heavy with amends. Sela's locket burned, her heart a tangle of hope and wariness. The vows came, raw and fierce. Julian's voice trembled. "Sela, you're my anchor, my fight. You built us a home when the world tried to break us. I vow to stand always by your side." His words were a blade, slicing through memories of Catherine's rumors, of Lake Forest's scorn. Sela's eyes glistened, her voice resonant. "Julian, you chose me when it cost everything. For Arya, for us, I vow to forge a world where love wins." She glanced at Arya, who twirled, oblivious, her joy afire. The rings, simple gold bands, slid on, catching the fairy lights, a seal on their defiance. The officiant's pronouncement unleashed a cheer, and Julian's kiss was deep, a rebellion. Against every wall they'd toppled. Arya rushed them, her arms wrapping their knees, her laughter a melody. The garden erupted, jazz swelling, guests spilling to the dance floor, kids from the center chasing fireflies. Catherine watched, her fingers twisting her pearls, her face a mask cracking under the weight of Arya's joy. Richard leaned toward her, his voice low. "She's their heart, Catherine, we were wrong." Her lips quivered, but she stayed silent, her eyes fixed on Sela, radiant in her gown. As the stars emerged, Catherine rose, her steps unsteady, and approached Sela by the ivy arch. The crowd hushed, the jazz fading to a hum. She held a small envelope, Arya's photo tucked inside, and pressed it into Sela's hand. In her elegant script, "Your home humbles us all." "Sela," she said, her voice a fractured whisper. "We were blind. You've built something eternal." Her eyes glistened, pride and shame colliding. Sela's locket pulsed, her voice steady. "This home is Arya's, Catherine. Join it if you're ready." Her words were a bridge, offered but not begged. Catherine's gaze faltered, a nod her only reply, but her hand lingered on the envelope, a tremor of surrender. She stepped back, Richard's hand on her shoulder, their silhouettes soft against the garden's glow. The music surged, and Sela rejoined Julian, Arya in her arms. They danced, the center's families circling them, their laughter a shield against the past. Elise with Lila spun nearby, her smile warm, a crack in the Mercer wall. The night deepened, the Chicago skyline a constellation of dreams. Sela tossed her bouquet, caught by a center teen who laughed. her joy echoing Arya's. Julian's voice was low, fierce. "Our family, Selah, forever." She nodded, her locket gleaming, but Catherine's envelope in her pocket was a reminder. Peace was fragile. The garden pulsed, a haven of love in Hyde Park's heart. The center's murals loomed beyond, a testament to Selah's fight. Her worth was her own, carved from Bronzeville's streets, sealed in Arya's giggle, anchored in Julian's hand. The lake's waves sang, a rhythm of victory. This night was theirs, but Selah's fire burned bright, ready for whatever dawn might bring. Thank you for joining Selah and Julian's journey through love, defiance, and triumph over prejudice. Their story, woven in Chicago's vibrant heart, reminds us that homes are built on courage. What moved you most? Was it Selah's unyielding spirit, Julian's redemption, or Arya's innocent spark? Drop your thoughts in the comments, we'd love to hear how this resonated with you. Share where you're listening from, Chicago, London, or beyond, and what time it is there. Your support lights up our storytelling, so please like, share, and subscribe for more tales that inspire. Until next time, keep fighting, keep shining, and we'll see you soon.